Thank you. Okay, it's Friday afternoon. Let me put that back. It's Friday afternoon. I want to talk about politics extensively, and politics more than policy. And we get a bit on privilege in there. And I think, hopefully, you'll see some connections from the last two really, really thoughtful and I thought excellent presentations. I'm going to start off a little bit parochially, and I'm going to start off with some more men in suits. This is Keir Starmer, who is now 7 days into his new prime ministership. I think one of the things I suspect that happens when someone like Keir takes over is they gain lots of new friends who are interested in telling them their own spin on the world, giving them advice. People like this man, Tony Blair, who preceded Keir by 3, 4, 5 prime ministers and about 15 years. In that intervening time, Tony Blair and his foundation have travelled the world, dispensing various kinds of political advice to states, to large firms, to NGOs, and so on. And here is Tony Blair dispensing his advice on public service reform and what he thinks needs to go into the top of Keir Starmer's to-do list as he gets going in 10 Downing Street. And for Tony Blair, AI is at the heart of this. The promises of AI at the heart of this. Within 8 hours, these two stories were published in the Times and the Guardian, and this second story is also to do with public service reform here in the UK, but it could be about the reform that we've already heard is much needed anywhere really in the world. This story takes exactly the opposite view. It says, hey, wait a second, what is going on? What's the deal with some of this AI advice? Are we missing the wood for the trees? Do we actually need to get real and focus on what's really wrong in our health services and our other social sectors? So I want to explore some of that in the talk. That's better, yeah. The Guardian article was built on this Lancet piece that came out. That came out last week as well, I think. And it said, look, novel technologies have been much hyped as magic bullets. Early detection tests, for example, early diagnosis, AI for revolutionizing administrative and treatment processes, new treatments, and so on. So the promises are there. These are making real difference in certain sectors of medicine for sure. But as the piece really nicely points out, you still need people to take a patient's history, to take blood, to do surgery, to break bad news. Building, I think, on some of the things that Praminda was talking about this morning. And I want to kind of reflect on some of that work that Praminda is doing. I've been lucky enough to be involved working on some of those projects with Praminda over the last few years. And I want to reflect on the different directions, the different trajectories in which AI, embodied AI, robotics built on AI is emerging, and the choices, the political choices, the social choices, the decisions that need to be made along the way. And I want to contrast those directions. And I want to make a point that the politics of AI lies right in the middle, right in the choice between various different options, various different directions. And in this, in these couple of images, I'd point out a couple of features I think are really important. The classic industrialized robot that is still within a working environment, it's caged off. I think I've got one of these things. Yeah, you'll see a cage there. Humans aren't allowed to approach this thing. It's really dangerous. If that whacks you, you're in big trouble. It's got various different emergency off switches there. By comparison, the most important aspect, I think, of this second robotic device, assistive robotic device here, is the second person in the picture, who we can't see fully. This person has helped put on the device. This person has helped ensure that it fits properly, it's comfortable, it's snug, and it's doing the caring job it's supposed to do. And I'm going to argue over the next few minutes that these kind of telltale signs, they show different values, and those values are really informing directions of who benefits. And if we think that there are different directions there, the politics, of course, is in who decides. 3 parts to this. And in the first part, I want to make this point, that artificial intelligence and the directions that these systems, these technologies are traveling in and progressing in, they're absolutely not inevitable. Okay. I want to go back to some of the stuff Praminda was talking about earlier. And I want to pull out 2 features of the assistive robotics that interest me, that I think are really important and help build a case that AI can be otherwise. It can be different, perhaps. But we need to be attentive to the conditions that help propel and more importantly, steer that. The first is perhaps how the radical nature of care. How care really privileges, shows very different ways of relating to people and things. And I think there's been a huge amount of work in this over the last 10, 15, 20 years in various different social sciences and so on. And this is an important point here. The best care is not simply about providing comfort or sustenance, but enabling and empowering, developing, maintaining the capabilities of another human being. And of course, we can go beyond thinking about older people here, going beyond thinking about those living with frailty, as we discussed, as Praminda discussed this morning. We could also think, of course, about children, about teaching, and other care work across society. And beyond humans, establishing relations that really repair the world, building on feminist ethics, and so on. Care is everything we do to maintain, continue, and repair our world so that we may live in it as well as possible. And I think these kind of values, this kind of orientation, care as an obligation, as a relational feature of people being together in the world, is quite different. I'm going to show you, I hope, from some of the things, some of the ways of being that current AI technologies really do inhabit. Okay, that was the radical nature of care. The other part I understood from Praminda's work, or certainly that I'd like to really highlight, I think is a hopeful aspect of this. And 2 aspects of hope I think are really important. Hope is generative. Hope gives us the feeling and creates the possibility that other ways of being are possible. And so much of what we hear about AI at the moment is, as this BBC article suggests, is that AI it's inevitable. Stand out of the way, adapt. We can't mitigate this stuff. All we can do is tinker around the edges. And I think if we can pull out that hope, if we can pull out that possibility and create the conditions for that, then maybe we're onto something here. Maybe AI can be useful. I'm not going to give a definition of AI, but I want to draw attention to one characteristic I think is really important as we start to explore these politics. And that's the work that AI does, the work that that machine learning, that computational technology, that predictive technology that asserts that the future will be a certain way, is that it reassigns and restructures agency. The photo here is from an Amazon warehouse. And certainly if we think about the development of robotics and artificial intelligence and computational technologies in factories, in industrial settings, over the last 50, if not 100 years, this idea of reassigning agency from production on the shop floor into other areas of organizations and other areas of society is really important. And that's the characteristic I want to keep in mind here. It shifts decision-making across organizations. And I guess the comparison I want to make is this commensurate? The taking away of agency, the shifting of it elsewhere, is this suitable for caring environments, for being, working, relating together, and so on? Okay, let's keep that in mind. What's at stake here? Let's go through this really quickly. This isn't the hopeful part of the discussion, but we'll get to that maybe in a minute. Okay. Appropriating cultures on an unprecedented scale, the work that has gone into large language models like ChatGPT has sucked up huge amounts of human knowledge on a break the rules first and apologize later type of basis. We see ghost work. We see Sam Altman's projects use data cleaners, doing viewing, cleaning, dealing with often traumatic data. In Kenya, in this example, using kind of regulatory voids, regulatory gaps to establish offshore companies at arm's length from the customers and from the ultimate users of AI. We see toxic extraction in the rare earth minerals that go into the data centers, that go into the batteries, that go into the technical components on which artificial intelligence absolutely depends. Is Kelly from Ireland still here? Kelly from obviously I'm from Ireland as well. This is a story that is bubbling away in Ireland for the last 6 months. And the point here is that not only do we see in AI a very small number of large, powerful firms have economic and market dominance, we see overstretched and over-leveraged positions that those firms have in using national, in this case, renewable energy infrastructure. And those firms saying, hey, wait a second, Irish government, we want a new data centre in Dublin, we want a new data centre in Galway, and we want privileged access to your renewable power in order to do that. First dibs on that. We see algorithms of oppression, platforms of precarity, and we know that the harms that these are creating are intersectional. They evacuate, they invisibilize those already marginalized and exacerbate often that marginality. We see in places like this AI not only in realizations of military supremacy, but in ethical justifications for why that military supremacy is the most ethical in the world. And the last of these points, I think for me is really important. We see AI not only as a direction of research in itself, but we see AI shaping other fields like agriculture, fields like health science, fields like material discovery, crowding out other ways of producing knowledge, other ways of knowing, and following strong lines in computational knowledge discovery and so on. Dominant directions of AI, 3 points here. This is not about existential risk. This is about harms happening right now. And it's about misallaying the view that we're all in this together. We're not all in this together. The harms, and some of which I've shown just here, are not evenly distributed. Second point, accelerating in unjust and unsustainable directions. You might say, okay, Cian, you've just shown me a list of maybe colonial modernity, the harms of late capitalism. Well, exactly. The point here that I'm trying to make is AI, or certainly the mainstream directions AI we see today, are perhaps accelerating some of these and not acknowledging that other directions are possible. So the point here, if radical and hopeful directions of AI are to emerge, we need to understand the politics, the decisions, the players behind these. Okay, let's think about the politics. 3 or 4 or 5 different ways in which governance of AI, decision-making frameworks are dominantly understood today. I think first and foremost we see, and there's certainly lots of politicians on this screen, we see aligned interests. This isn't the story of state, this isn't the story necessarily of firms. It's a story of maybe entanglement of actors from both of those categories. Another way we see emerging strongly in terms of the governance of AI is through risk-based appraisal. Europe's AI Act strongly is framed around appraising different kinds of risks, and I'd argue in quite a narrow way. We could think about AI ethics and the dominance of that discourse perhaps over the first 10 years, arguably the most dominant way we've thought about reappropriating the risks and harms of AI, which emphasize individualism and often hide and distract from broader social and group and collective harms. Building on from that, we see responsible AI as a way funders in particular of AI research are starting to think about how they might direct directions of AI towards societally appropriate ways. And in this country, and our former Prime Minister, more men in suits here, have directed us towards safety as a concern, arguing that actually, if we think safety is an issue, it should be experts who decide on that and privileging certain kinds of, in particular, long-term risks there. What all of these miss, I think, is a politics of difference, a politics perhaps of radical hope, and a politics that says there can be alternative ways of proceeding. We just have to look, perhaps, at the margins. And democracy is in, I thought I better give you some explanation of what I mean by democracy. It's in the title of the talk. By democratic politics, I don't mean representation. I don't mean procedure. What I mean is this, a notion that democracy really is accessed by the least powerful to the capacities for challenging power. The least powerful. And so if we think about those folks who rely or even work in care sectors, one of the most marginalized sectors we see that this idea of a democratic innovation is really, really important, I think. It's important for the politics that create AI, the politics that fund it, the politics that give legitimacy to corporations and governments and funding agency, and it's vital for the politics that are remade by AI. The world in which we live in with AI technologies and so on in them. So the argument is this: if mainstream AI is structuring power away from society, then democracy may be this idea that somehow collective action, somehow citizen involvement, and we see here workers outside, I think, an Amazon warehouse can be involved in that. Well, maybe that's our best chance to redirect some of this. The last part, innovation, democracy, and AI. How might we foment, how might we cultivate, how might we sustain some notion of democracy in AI? 5 ideas. First, we've got to be attentive to the multiple directions. We've got to be attentive that the progress isn't necessarily something to be slowed down or speeded up, but it's something to be directed and steered. And we must be attentive to the alternate destinations. And they're there. Platform cooperatives, data commons, citizen sensing environments, commons-based peer production. At a technological level, we can see some of these possible futures emerging today. But these different directions aren't just applications. They're really, for me, an important part is mapping the values that are promoted at the heart of these technologies. So going back to this idea of industrial versus care, we can think of contrasting values or contrasting imperatives in the design of these technologies in terms of, for instance, accentuating managerial control versus relational care work. A focus on substituting human tasks, human labor, versus adding complementarities, adding assistiveness, both to folks receiving care and the professions giving care, for example. We can think about individualization versus mutual cooperation and how different technologies, AI, might spur on that. We can think of endpoints of capital accumulation and profit versus human flourishing. And if we take any of these seriously, we work back and we think of, okay, what are the indicators? What are the proxies? What are the ways we measure success? What are the ways we reward success? Both in terms of the funding bodies, the firms, the shareholder value that might be framed in various different kinds of ways that will encourage this. Okay, the second point, alignment, the extent to which AI directions meet societal needs. And I want to give you a couple of examples maybe of where these things don't align. But these questions are we heading in the same direction? Should we be heading in the same direction? Is consensus important, or should we value difference? Should we be heading in multiple directions at the same time? And should we have suites of technologies that allow us to do that? Who decides these directions? Who gets left behind? Are we attentive to that? This is Alondra Nelson. Alondra Nelson was in the Office of Science and Technology for Joe Biden's first year or so, I think. And this idea of alignment has been growing in the technology sphere as a very narrow, values-based, individual values, normative ethics-based proposal. And Alondra Nelson says, let's open this up. Let's make sure that when we're appraising these technologies and appraising directional alignment, we are responding to values such as sustainability, transparency, equity, and so on. Work that I'm in the middle of, we've got a large survey in the field at the moment, so this is very much provisional. Work that I'm in the middle of with colleagues here at UCL are looking at public values surveys that ask publics, what do you think about AI at the moment? What do you think about the directions, the risks, the benefits, how they should be spread? And that's good work that's been done over the last 3-4 years by institutes such as the Ada Lovelace Institute and Alan Turing Institute here, the Office for National Statistics in the UK. And we're starting to get a sense of what publics might value here. What we don't yet have is a sense of what AI the developers think. And does this stuff align? And in survey work we're doing, asking, and these results represent about 1,000 different AI developers. We're asking them questions like, well, what do you think about increased access to learning? What do you think about the prospects for making jobs easier? What do you think about the prospects for improving personal safety? The blue is the AI developers. And what we see when we're asking about these positive effects is huge misalignment. When we ask about negative effects, we see much closer results. So this is interesting for a couple of reasons. It's certainly interesting for the reason that perhaps AI developers are aware of the misbenefits, aware of the risks, and continue regardless. Another way we can measure this, this is an interesting study. In highly cited AI papers, can we see what values are in those? And these are usually technical papers talking about things like transformer models, machine learning, robot vision, and so on. And it turns out only 15% of these papers draw a link to social needs. And only 1% of these highly cited AI technical papers acknowledge even the downsides of technology. So we're not looking, and we're certainly not acknowledging some of the issues. Other issues there, questions of imagined intelligence are often prioritized. Benchmarks, performance metrics, standards are often the product of the industry themselves. And as Rishi Sunak says here, this is a case of AI firms marking their own homework. It's probably also a question and an issue of AI firms setting the questions for that homework too, in a double thing. Human capabilities, I think, are the third of these the five ways that we cultivate, we foment innovation democracy. What kind of human capabilities will maybe release that empowerment that is already there, as Neelam told us, in communities? And a point here, and myself and Praminda was involved in this. We asked a set of health and social care workers, what capabilities do you need to do your caring job on your terms? And they told us this. The point here is that these capabilities, the empowerment of workforces, needs to happen before AI lands, not just afterwards. Not just as a kind of a mitigation, we're sorry we've caused a few harms here, some of you have lost your jobs, but as a precursor, ensuring that society is ready for this. And I think that responsibility is on firms and developers and so on. The yellow capabilities here are capabilities that really demand participation in innovation processes. And I wanted to highlight that in particular. Praminda has highlighted this earlier in her talk, the need for infrastructures that allow empowerment of people, universal digital access, AI is no good without that. And all the procurement and all the diffusion of technologies into places like this, a care home on the south coast, is useless if folks don't have access. Data infrastructures need to measure what matters, not what will steer performance, not what will steer narrow measures of productivity and so on. Management is really important here, enabling staff to get on with their jobs. Procurement is really important here, and so often we see workforces are absolutely alienated from procurement decisions, which is really important in public care sectors. And again, participation in the process of innovation that lead to these. This is a photo I took at a conference for Care Tech a few months ago in February of this year, and I want to highlight this point. What is this AI platform doing? This just leaves me totally dispirited. Engaging communities to optimize income solutions that can help landlords recover revenue efficiently so that they can focus on supporting tenants. Right. The last point, what we need for innovation, democracy in AI, I think we need really strong institutions. I think we need agreed rules of the game. But I think important among them is that we keep appraising the impacts of technology as they're released. We don't put our AI tenant revenue recovery models out into the wild and walk away. And that when we're faced with uncertainty, we acknowledge that uncertainty. We acknowledge we're not really sure what's going to go on here. And we learn from previous struggles, particularly in sustainability, that precaution is a necessary and appropriate and political move. Okay, some conclusions. 3 slides left. This was our previous, and again, parochial, but I think not uncommon elsewhere. This was our previous science, innovation and technology minister, Michelle Donnellan, who lost her job last week. For me, the exciting thing about AI is the ability to transform our public services. Great, but as long as the way the state responds to care remains transactional and deaf to difference, we've got a problem. And this is from really impressive work that Hilary Cottam here at UCL has done on relations, on care, on how we recover a sense of the radical, not just with AI, but with our care infrastructures more generally. So, summary points. The greatest threat is not existential risk, but that we are locked into already extractive directions of inequality and exclusion. And to challenge those, I think we need to focus on the politics of the here and now, not some distant risk. And we need to really concentrate on those conditions that can foster radical and hopeful politics. Thanks.
That was very provocative and very thought-provoking, but I'm only going to give you one question. It's the one question. What? Yes, we need someone. It's the one question. Anybody? It's one there. Quick question and quick answer.
Hi there. My name is John Silboy, and I'm from Nova Scotia, Canada. I'm First Nations, and First Nations meaning Indigenous. And we're looking at AI as a process by which we can capture our collective knowledge and put it into an AI format so that we could use it in the benefit of language and preservation. The challenge we have is that AI is clanky at this point and doesn't catch up to Indigenous knowledges in that it has a sense of individual ways of doing knowledge translation, but not a collective consciousness as is needed for language preservation and also teaching it. So one of the questions we have is how can we benefit from AI for all of those Indigenous languages that are in danger of extinction? And with it comes with all the knowledge, with knowledge about medicines and knowledge about land, knowledge about different aspects and
okay, so that's the question.
Dealing with this.
Cian, quickly.
I don't know is the answer, is my quick answer, John. I do know that that's a really important question. I do know you didn't mention, for example, sensorial knowledge, other forms of knowledge that we think, other kind of relational forms of knowledge. I guess what interests me in that is that 20 years ago, there were debates about other kind of computational knowledge prior to AI. And I don't think those debates got resolved, but there were really important questions raised about actually, can we datafy, what are the limits to any kind of datafication of knowledge? And my first go-to place for that is some of those debates and reopening them, because I think they were stabilized and prematurely closed. But I'd love to talk to you more about your projects. Excellent.